In this lesson, we're going to talk about the Pythagorean Theorem. The Pythagorean Theorem is something that we use when we're trying to find lengths of our sides of our triangle, but more specifically, the lengths of sides of a right triangle. The sides that form the right angle on a triangle are called the legs. The side opposite the right angle, which is always the longest side, is called the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is the side that is directly across from the right angle, and it is always the longest side of your triangle. Okay? The Pythagorean theorem basically helps us find the leg lengths and the hypotenuse length when we have a right triangle. So here is the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem states, for any right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs, so the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs equals the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So what does that really mean? In algebra terms, what that means is we call the legs A and B, and in reality it doesn't really matter which one you call A and B, but just make sure that your legs are your A and B. But A squared plus B squared is going to equal C squared. The hypotenuse is always the C, always the longest of our sides. So even if we weren't given a picture and we were just given a bunch of lengths of a triangle, the longest one would have to be the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse, again, C, is always across from the right angle. So again, we know it's the longest side. We also know that it's across the triangle from the right angle. So how do we go about using that in a problem to try to solve a missing side? Well, from the first triangle here in example 1, we know we have a right triangle because of the right angle box in the corner. We want to make sure we identify our sides that we have. The legs are the A and the B. They've come together to kind of form that right angle right here. They are also the ones that are adjacent to the right angle. The C is the one on the opposite side of the right angle, which is going to be the hypotenuse. So basically, this is the formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Then I can just plug in my numbers and figure out what we get. So one of my legs is 7. My other leg is 24. And what we don't know is C. So then I use my PEMDAS to do my squares first. I combine those two numbers to get 625 equals C squared. At that point, I then take the square roots. Need a little more room here. And after I've taken the square root of both sides, C is going to equal 25. And notice that I don't say positive or negative. C would have to be 25 centimeters because length of a triangle would always be a positive, so we wouldn't include the negative 25. So try the second one. The second one we'll check back in 1 second with the answer. Just run through your A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So hopefully you came up with the same solution that I just came up with. If we do our A and B for our two legs, we have a 10 and a 7. We square both of those numbers and add them together to get 149. Then we take the square root of both sides so that C squared becomes C, and we get approximately 12.2 inches. In our next example, we now have a triangle where we're trying to find the missing length of a right triangle. But notice this time we have to be careful about our information. When I look at this one, I do have the A and I have the B, which are the two legs. But over here, notice the C value we actually have. So what we want to make sure we do here is when we plug in our formula, we want to make sure that when we use a squared plus b squared equals c squared, because we have the right triangle, we want to make sure that we are using the right information in the right spots. The b is the one we're looking for this time. So notice how the 6.5 goes to the right side because it is the c. The hypotenuse has to be squared by itself, and then it will equal the two legs both squared and added together. So 3.5, again you can use your calculator. When I square that, I get 12.25 plus b squared. 6.5 squared is 42.25. I would then use my SADMEP, or inverse operations, to now isolate b. When I subtract that, I get 30 equals b squared. I then take the square root to undo b squared to become b. And again, we're not going to really consider the negative square root of 30 because we're talking about the length of a triangle, which we can't have as a negative number. And we're going to get, with our calculator, the square root of 30 is about 5.477. So we're going to use b as approximately 5.5 kilometers. And here, for example 3, for our last example in this section, we have a paintball team that is located 70 feet north and 60 feet east of the base. The team B is located 30 feet north and 30 feet east of the base. How far apart are the teams? So basically what is going to happen here is we kind of have their distance kind of from each other going across this little diagonal. And what we're going to use is we're going to kind of create a right triangle by finding this dimension right here and going this way to find this dimension to create the right angle. And now we basically have an A and a B, and we're going to try to find the C, which is actually the distance that we're looking for. So what we want to do here is a squared b squared equals c squared. So we've kind of created a right triangle, even though we initially look at it, it's just going to be a diagonal on the picture. So what we want to think of here is A is going to be 40, B is going to be the 30. What we don't know is the C, but we have c squared waiting for the other side. 40 squared is 1600, 30 squared is 900 equals c squared. 2500 equals c squared. Now notice when I take the square root of this one, c is going to be equal to 50. So these two teams are 50 feet apart. So the Pythagorean theorem is going to be a very helpful formula or tool for us to be able to find missing side lengths of a right triangle. And again, it has to be a right triangle, but once we know it's a right triangle, we have that relationship between all the different sides. The hypotenuse is your longest side. It is the side that's across from the right angle. When you square that side, it is the same thing as squaring the two other legs and adding them together. So the Pythagorean theorem is going to be something that will be very helpful when you're solving problems with triangles and lengths of the sides of the right triangles.